Kerst. I'm the principal ergonomist for Mayline and Safco. And today we are going to talk about a really important topic that is really moving the needle in business performance, some of the factors around wellness and how we can inspire some designs in our workplace to help improve human performance. And more importantly, what are some new options that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago? So let's get right into it. Again, I said, I'm an ergonomist, but we're going to take a big picture view and start. You might ask why we're looking at an astronaut in space. Interestingly enough, I had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Joan Vernocos at NASA. She's the director of life sciences and worked with astronauts, John Glenn, Neil Armstrong. What they actually did over the course of 2 or 3 decades is look at how the human body performs, and specifically in the absence of gravity, it adopts a neutral posture. That neutral posture may look different than what we think of here on Earth. It is one where our hips are open at about 135 degrees, knees are slightly bent. It turns out that's the position that the human body optimally performs in a resting position, and it's actually where the joints experience the least amount of stress. We compare that to what in my field, the ergonomics field, of what we think of a neutral posture, and that typically is what I call the 90-90-90 position. That's 90 degrees of my back to my thighs, 90 degrees of my thighs to my legs, and 90 degrees of my feet to the floor. That was a really good concept in the 1990s, but I think today, actually, we have a new position. We can take that sort of more neutral posture, that open hip position, the knees slightly bent, and the body in this more natural position to represent a new option for us. And what that means is we're seeing workplaces actually evolve, and so that you can actually see that mirrored posture, that our hips are open, our knees are bent. People are more active and more engaged. And what that leads to is some really interesting spaces that are new options for us, right? They allow us to break up that traditional work setting and make it more flowing, better work performance comes from that. And, the nice thing about this is we get some wellness benefits out of that. So as we look at this sort of change, some of the other changes that are happening in today's workplace is who is working with us today. So for the first time in history, we have 5 generations working side by side globally. That means everyone from the silent generation through the baby boomers, which I happen to be, all the way through our Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z. In fact, the millennials, otherwise known as Gen Y, make up the majority of the workforce now, and that's been since 2016, in the workforce. But guess what? Within 2 years, Gen Z will surpass them. And why is that important to us from a business performance standpoint? Well, I think the way people experience and what they expect from their workplace is distinctly different. I'll give you an example. So I'm a baby boomer. That means I was born from 1946 to 1964. If I didn't know the answer to a question, I had to wait till mom or dad got home and I'd ask them. Who does a Gen Z, if a Gen Z individual doesn't know the answer to a question, who do they ask? They probably ask Google. When is Google closed? Never. When do they expect an answer from Google? Right now. So that has led to a self-reliance and a more active-oriented, action-oriented position in Gen Z of how, when, and where they work. So I think it's important that we look at how we're going to accomplish all 5 generations, but there are some other changes that are happening in the workplace that really are influencing this space as well. And one of those changes that's not really great is that we are living more and more sedentary lives. In my lifetime, the amount of sedentary work has gone up 80%. We call this technology-induced inactivity. I'll say it again. Yep, technology has made us more sedentary. So out of a 24-hour day, if we have 8 hours of sleep, that leaves 16 hours. How much time are we inactive? Well, the number might shock you that we're inactive upwards of 15 hours a day. And so all this inactivity can lead to some really negative consequences. One of the studies that recently came out from Vonderburg showed that for every extra hour of this sedentary time, we increase the odds of this negative thing known as type 2 diabetes. They used to call it adult onset diabetes, but since it's occurring to kids 5 and 6 years of age, we've now got to come up with a new name, type 2 diabetes. In fact, if we look at what happens right now in the United States, over 29 million people have diabetes. That's about 1 in 11. The scary part is 1 in 4 of you don't even know you have it. And so, yes, globally, it's about 10 times that, or 285 million people. And it's broken down into 2 different types. There's type 1, which is known as often juvenile diabetes, but 90% of this is that type 2, the stuff we can control. It's never too late. That's what we put in our bodies and what we do with our bodies. The scary part is over the next few years, if we do nothing to reverse this trend, what that number looks like is astounding. It's almost 440 million people. Just to put in context for my little brain, that's every man, woman, and child in the United States today, plus every man, woman, and child in the UK. That's a tremendous number. And so as we look at this, we're going to have to say, what can we do about this activity? And, let's just go back to the United States for a second. We're going to go through the last 25, 30 years in time lapse here. And what you're seeing is each state progressing from the 1990s all the way up to 2014. This is from the National Health and Human Services data, known as NHANES. And as a state, and I'm broadcasting today from the state of Michigan, you can see I put Michigan's numbers down on the bottom right corner. So in 1990, we were at 6.9% of our population that was obese. Today, at least 2014, when the last data we have, we're almost 36%. So wherever you're listening to this recording, you might want to look at your state and see it's increasing, and it's not linear. It's going up at an ever increasing rate. So I think we have some real opportunities from a business performance standpoint to take a look at some alternatives. One more thing before we sort of look at those alternatives and what the need for those alternatives is what happens to our body. While we might not see these trends over 30 years, what we might feel on the right-hand side is we might have a sore back or tight hip flexors or poor leg circulation. Our body tells us this might not be best for us. We also see over the course of years on the left-hand side of your screen that the spine is actually changing. We're looking at a spine from 1911 from Gray's Anatomy. That's a medical text, not a TV show. And compare that to a spine of early 1990s, and we see already changes from that sedentary behavior, more curve, and actually the spine is compressed. So we are really at a point now where people, both in their businesses and their industrial settings and their healthcare settings or even their schools, realize that traditional sitting is under pressure. So I often ask people, given this sort of pandemic, true or false, there's a current public health policy warning against the risks of all this technology-induced inactivity. Well, make your bets here. The answer is true. The American Medical Association back in June of 2013 said that prolonged sitting, particularly in work settings, causes health problems. And so they're not suggesting we come up with some neutral gravity workstations. All they're asking is that second to last sentence says, give us some alternatives. Give me a few alternatives. And I bet you've been able to see some of those alternatives pop up in the last 3 or 4 years. And that's policy H440.843. You can write that down or record this as you see that's important. But we've seen that. How many have gone to a coffee shop or a restaurant and seen a choice that I can either sit or I can stand? I can have a standing, more active environment. At an airport, you have the opportunity to do work with your laptop or chat on your phone, either seated or standing, right? That might be inside an airport club or any number of different settings. So, I would say in the last 3 or 4 years, we're seeing sort of that needle move towards more options and what the AMA had asked for, which is just give me a few alternatives. Whenever I see sort of these changes happening in the field of ergonomics, I look to others to sort of say, what's happening in their organizations, or at least in their countries. One of the countries that I often look to is our neighbors up north, our Canadians. And lo and behold, the Canadian government has just launched a major initiative called the Vision for a Healthy Canada. And that's from a wellness standpoint about what we put in our bodies, how we live, and this whole idea of mindfulness and being in the present. In fact, recently, they just invested in a nationwide program to combat sedentary behavior in their workplaces. And those wacky Canadians called it the sit kicker, so they could kick the sit out of their sedentary work habits. But I think what we're seeing is it's gaining sort of more and more attention. Well, where else are we seeing some of these things gain attention? You know, I would say as an ergonomist, I saw at least in buildings and building designs and occupant designs, there was a focus in the 90s and early 2000s on sort of LEED and energy conservation, you know, LEED certification. You know, CBRE, the CB Richard Ellis, put together a real study to say, what are some of the trends? What is moving the needle inside these commercial real estate spaces? And so they took that look forward and they interviewed folks and they said there are some major trends that are going to happen. So if we want to be ahead of the curve and look what trends we want to address, the number one item they said is, how do we compete for the best and the brightest? So that's 18%. The top 5 sources of competitive advantage is, yeah, give me the best and the brightest and make sure no one poaches them. We want to be innovative. We want to be adaptive and use technology. But you know what? If we want to attract the best and brightest, how do we do that? Right? What do we do to get those folks? Lo and behold, 85% of the folks that were interviewed said wellness moves the needle, and specifically wellness in 3 specific areas. Number one, when a candidate comes into your organization and walks into their lobby, guess what? They are judging you. Yep, I hate to say it. They're judging how well your space and your lobby space inspires that overall well-being, what they were offered, what the sort of accommodations and what the features are. The second of the 3 spaces is, believe it or not, what did the meeting room or the conference room that they did the interview with you and look like, right? Did you have some active options? Was there a standing conference table? What kind of accoutrements and lighting was provided? And the last place that these candidates were making judgment is, what did your C-suite look like? Are your C-suite executives, you know, walking the talk, or are they behind big mahogany desks and batted leather chairs? So as we see CBRE really looking at this, they're expressing that these demands and impact on the physical space, making a big difference. And that's happening sort of on a global basis. So, you know, in Europe, they're calling this Vision 2030, as we're taking from the top left-hand corner of this sort of industrialized Manchester, England setting and actually making communities more walkable, or actually adding in the bottom left-hand corner more public transportation. And believe it or not, the Vision 3 is to make them completely walkable. And, you know, I don't know if you have had a community area that has had a road that's actually been closed for traffic, and what they find is most businesses actually pick up. In fact, that becomes a more attractive neighborhood. You know, I'm broadcasting from Michigan, and I live near Detroit, Michigan. We are known as the Motor City. That would never, right, fly in the Motor City. Believe it or not, this summer, the Greektown section of the Motor City actually closed the streets and actually made that more walkable. We're drawing more and more businesses to this area, as well as attracting the best and the brightest. So as we've seen companies sort of focused initially on LEED certification, let me share with you the new concept, and that's called WELL Building Standard. The WELL Building Standard represents the next evolution of what organizations are looking for. There are 7 specific elements there, from air, water, nourishment, light, fitness, comfort, and mind, 102 specific items. But they're actually asking, how does that building support wellness, and actually how does the half mile around that building support overall integration with the community? So it's really exciting to see some of these changes. So as we go into individuals and that high quality talent is coming into your lobby, what do they see? Well, what they might see is instead of a row of cubes, what they might see is organizations that are built into what we call neighborhoods. These neighborhoods actually fall into one of four categories. They might be social, those are illustrated by the green sign here. They might be heads down focus area. They might be learning areas or training areas. They might be ad hoc or even formal collaboration areas. So instead of having one person, one cube, we might find that as my tasks vary through the day, I might go to different areas. And so that might mean in my lobby, we have a third space where we can actually hold meetings and have that lighting and have that well-building analysis to tell us, that we're actually moving the needle in terms of what we're doing for attracting and retaining the best and the brightest. We might actually have meeting areas that provide a multitude of options. They might have enclosed spaces. They might have seated. They might have standing. They might have casual areas where we can meet. Again, they might provide what we call those alternatives. And they might actually include some of this new seating that actually provides us the ability to work in a semi-standing position. So it's a real exciting time to be in the workplace. We know all that changes. Those 5 generations are out there, and each one of those generations has distinctly different needs. What I want to do is share with you in the last piece of this are what are some of those options that perhaps didn't exist 5, 10, or 15 years ago. We're going to start from the right and work our way left today. So on the right-hand side, we're going to talk about active sitting. And so we'll probably have about 85% of North America that still has a seated desk, right? And so that's 29.5 inches. And so what do we do for the person who still is seated? Well, we can give them some active seating options. We've seen seats that allow people to move and engage their core, and some of them actually are more mobile than others. In the far right side, you see one of our newest designs here called the Keg that actually has a swivel. That cushion fabric support actually swivels to allow the individual to move. And when we talk to folks, they say, yeah, we like that, but we want even more adjustment. Can you make one of those lift up and down? The answer is absolutely. We can do it for kids. We can do it for big kids as well. So the whole idea of active movement, as we start out with that astronaut, is to give those open hip positions, give people more options to move throughout the day. Whether they can fidget or rock and roll, we call it rocking their day job. If they want to interact with a table, and maybe that table's a little different too. It might have a dry erase top, as you see illustrated here. And there might be some other options that exist. Well, I would be remiss to have a talk about some of the new changes without talking about sort of standing desks and what the benefit of standing desks are. They seem very, very popular these days, and there's some health benefits around them. When you stand or you're in a more active position, your heart beats more, you can about 10 beats per minute. You burn more calories, and somewhere between 40 and 60 calories an hour, depending on your body size. But you know what? 50 calories an hour over a course of a few hours a day, 3,000 calories per pound. I'll do the math for you. That can add up to about 10 pounds a year. My personal experience is I went from almost 215 pounds, and I've lost about 10 pounds a year. I'm down to 185 pounds, and I'll show you a before and after picture at the end of this. It's a real exciting way, because I know in today's busy world, we all want to be well and have wellness, but I'm not sure we have 30 or 45 minutes extra at the end of the day to get that. And so what we were really looking at is wellness while we work. And you know what? This is a totally new concept, right? Not so much. In fact, on the bottom right-hand side, from the original Sears and Roebuck catalog, you see what was known as the standing Jeffersonian desk, which allowed individual to work either seated or standing. And the upper right-hand side, I bet you didn't realize Winston Churchill was near an IKEA. No, he fabricated and had his people fabricate a standing desk that he could do his work on. So we see that this is a concept that's been around for a while. In fact, these standing desks are really, really popular. Here's my watch out to all of you listening today. A standing desk is a good start, but it's an incomplete solution. It's a cake, not a party. If I'm going to have a birthday party, yes, I want a cake, but I also want presents. I want balloons. I need people to come and visit me. So the point is, A sit-stand desk is a great start, but the uncomfortable truth is after a while of standing, so should I sit all day or should I stand all day? The answer is we should probably move around during the day, because most people who give up their seated position for a standing desk, they find that after the honeymoon is over, this is a scary part. After 6 to 8 weeks, only 1 in 5 are able to use that standing feature in any way, shape, or form. And I think this is the reason is it's an incomplete solution. Listen, if you want to stand all day, there are some risks associated with that, right? Varicose veins that associated with that. And as we go through that, there's a sort of carotid atherosclerosis. So that's a common health problem associated with prolonged standing. So how do we fix that? So the answer is, for a complete solution, we're looking at floor mats. We need a nice cushy floor mat. We might need a foot rail or a way to change our posture frequently. And I think the most exciting thing is now we have these semi-standing seats that allow us to sort of lean up against the seat as we sort of lean up our backside against the kitchen counter. Maybe we're familiar with that position. And so that's an exciting element as we go through these sort of options. So, I took you from active sitting. We went all the way to the left to the standing desk, and we talked a little bit about sit to stand. What's really cool is this new option, this lean to stand or perching. This is an example that really is growing and giving us a new solution, a new tool in our toolbox. Let's take a look at what that might be representative of. We've actually seen some of those standing desks actually be incorporated into kids in the classroom. And one of the things that's really nice about that is, in this case, our alphabetter desk actually has a fidget bar. And so if you look really carefully, you see that young student's foot is on a bar. That bar fidgets back and forth. It allows them to change their posture as they go through the day. And I mentioned sort of the semi-standing seats. It's good for big kids as well. So we have sort of that same benefit. And if you look carefully, you can see this occupant's got his foot on that bar as well. Again, taking some of the weight off our body and allowing us to sort of enjoy that motion and adopt that neutral position. In summary, it's really all the comfort of sitting, which we enjoy, plus the benefits and wellness associated with standing. I'll take an aside here and say that for 30 years as an ergonomist, I thought the goal of ergonomics was to make everyone so comfortable they never complained. Guess what? Check. We did a really good job. Unfortunately, they also never moved. So for the next 30 years, I'm going to try and help people have that comfort plus the benefits of movement so they can actually get wellness while they work. So if you only remember one thing from the short webinar, remember this: the single best posture, the absolute best posture, it's always your next one. And so that means a body in motion should probably stay in motion, that we have multiple ways to support the body. As we look at how the body moves, how often should we be alternating, Josh? Is this something that, I should move a couple times a day, a couple times an hour? Well, it turns out it's a couple times an hour. We now know that after 20 minutes of sitting or leaning or perching, it's probably a good idea to interrupt that inactivity cycle and spend 8 minutes of standing. We could do that on a nice anti-fatigue mat. We could do that with a foot rail. We might then actually do some whole body movement and go refresh our water, go interact with a client or a colleague. What we do know is this sort of movement really kicks into blood supply. And blood supply, as you see in the upper left-hand side here, is illustrated in the yellow and the red, and really can activate our brains. In as little as a few minutes, we can actually see that it's affecting our body's ability to interact from not only the amount of energy that we have, but also how we think and how we interact with our colleagues. This is really, really exciting. I've spent a lot of time in the last year working with kids in the classroom, and so wonder if this could actually have an impact on kids in the classroom. Let's just take a look really quickly here. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has correlated data from over 5 years and over 2,500 kids. And what they found is some exciting things. This is kind of a lot of information on here. I'm just going to hit the highlights. Number one, kids are performing better in the classroom. Kids are paying more attention. They're more engaged. They're less likely to disrupt the classroom. Discipline referrals are down. Bullying is down. You know, this is really exciting stuff to understand that kids can actually have some whole life learning. And so what we're seeing is all these positive benefits, and then translating that in today's workplace, we're seeing companies like Cisco take this concept and build that into what they call their team space. What they've also called their integrated workplace or workforce experience, IWE for short. And so that's a way for these 5 generations to work together within an overall infrastructure that allows them to have the power of choice to work either in a seated environment, a standing environment, to be more active, to have some natural light. And you know what? The cool thing about this is there's some real cost savings and some cost benefit. The ROIs you can see annually on each of the departments are 6 figures or 5 figures at least illustrated there. So, you know, we would be remiss to share with you that it's not just the schools, it's not just the workplace, but there's also other organizations that are seeing benefits from this. One of those organizations happens to be in the hospitality world, Marriott. Marriott actually has adopted this concept of wellness for employees and guests. And recent Forbes article, they talked about this, and David Rodriguez did a really great job of sharing this, of how by taking care of their staff and taking care of their guests, they become the employer and the best employer of choice, as well as attracting and obtaining the best talent. So whether that's in that third space that people tend to use more and more, and if you've had a meeting in a hotel lobby, but they're providing more options. And it's a chance for organizations of any vertical category to really adopt health and wellness, not only for their employees, but for their guests as well. We're seeing that in some cases, actually, we see people are more productive. So we have call centers now, and this is where the data has really come in the last 5 years. It's exciting stuff here. The call centers where they had one half of the group in the traditional 90-90-90 ergonomics 1.0 workstations compared to the new activity permissive work environments. Guess what they found? After a year, a 45% increase in productivity. I don't know any business that isn't looking to be more competitive. But the more exciting part is 3 out of 4 people who used those more active workstations said they don't want to go back. They felt better. So that was less discomfort and more productive. That's exciting stuff. And, you know, the folks at the Washington University actually did a study that said, get up, stand up, and they found that collaborative teamwork, in fact, the physical space you occupy alters how people think. People were more open to ideas. They were less territorial about their ideas, and that allowed for increased information elaboration and overall performance. So regardless of the settings, whether you're an industrial workplace and, from an ergonomic standpoint, we look at functional work rechart. What do some of these things do? They actually allow me to increase my span, my web that I have around my body as we move in a series of arcs and motions, and increase the functional use of that space. So whether it's in a hospitality setting, whether it's a traditional office setting, whether it's in a K through 12 or a higher ed setting, maybe it's in a healthcare setting, right? Maybe it's in a laboratory. These represent some really nice options that exist for us that weren't really around 5 or 10 years ago. So I'm going to leave you with one challenge. If you're thinking, Josh, this sounds like it's an exciting element, where should I start? The simplest and easiest place to start is give yourself one meeting space. Take one conference room, convert one conference room, give it some active meeting options, Maybe it's an flexible or a modular design, allows for either seated or perching positions, allows some nice dry erase or active seat options. Provide an active conference room. And if you're really up for it, you could look at both the lobby and the C-suite and also your bullpen areas. But try one meeting area and see what happens for you. I'll bet you find that your talent that you're trying to attract all is intrigued by this. The talent that you have is more likely to stay. You're going to find that these are more wellness-inspired options to satisfy all 5 generations. And you know what? At the end of the day, it really represents some exciting new options. So I wanted to sort of finish up with the before and after of what I used to look like. So this is on the left, Josh Ergonomics 1.0, where today, you know what, I'm very happy about sort of the options that exist today. At Mayline and Safco, we have a partnership and over 125 years of combined industry knowledge, right? We like to deliver a memorable experience because we really care about how and where you work. And with our approach inside these workplace spaces, we want to make sure that we give you wellness-inspired designs that energize and inspire you. And so we do this by listening to our customer. So thank you so much for your time today. We hope that you found some of this information helpful, and we're always available. And in fact, if you're very interested, you can connect with me, Josh Kerst, at LinkedIn, and we'll continue this dialogue as we go forward. So thank you very much and have a great day.